Hello, my name is Arlene Scott. I am the Elementary English Language Arts Consultant for the Lester B. Pearson School Board. This video is on how to analyze running records. It is a follow-up to the first video I made on how to do a running record. To find out about the material needed to do a running record, the conventions to use to code it, the procedure to follow, and how to determine a student's instructional reading level, please refer to Video 1, Running Records. This video will focus on analyzing a student's reading behavior. It will look at the miscues or errors students make while reading. We can determine which cues students use when reading and whether or not they cross-check and self-correct. Young children need to have certain basic concepts and abilities in order to learn to read. They need to understand the concept that print carries a message. They need the ability to visually attend to the distinctive features of printed text. And they need to understand the basic concepts about the conventions of printed English or French, such as directionality. We read from left to right and top to bottom. They need to know that words are made up of letters and sentences are made up of words. In order to read, readers use information in the printed text to help determine the author's message. Reading is an interactive process where the reader applies his or her knowledge of the world and knowledge of language as he or she reads and comprehends text. Marie Clay, a noted researcher in reading, developed running records. According to her, readers use cues from three sources when reading: meaning, the semantic cue system; structural, the syntactic cue system; and visual, the graphophonic cue system. The goal for readers is to integrate the three cueing systems while reading for meaning. For example, a child might look at a word, make the sound of the first letter, think of a word that would make sense, sound right, and match the visual features of the word. This child has initially used visual information, thought about meaning and structure, and then checked the prediction against the visual information. When confusion arises, it is cross-checked using the three sources of cues and the background experience the reader brings to the reading process. The strategy of integrating and cross-checking the cues results in accurate reading and self-corrections. Let's look at each one of these cueing systems. First, meaning. As the teacher, you need to think about whether the child's attempt makes sense up to the point of error. Did the meaning or the message from the text influence the error? Think about the background of the story, information from the picture, and meaning in the sentence when deciding if the student probably used meaning as a source for understanding. Meaning cues answer the question, does it make sense? Here's an example where the meaning of the sentence or story is reflected in the substitution, so the meaning cues are operating. The text is, I like to see horses at the farm. The student read, I like to see ponies at the farm. There were pictures of horses and colts on the same page. The intended message is almost the same. The substitution is not visually similar, but it is an acceptable language structure. So we can assume meaning was used in the substitution. Sometimes meaning and structural cues overlap. That being said, we cannot always assume meaning cues were being used if the substitution results in an acceptable, meaningful sentence. We can be more certain that they were being used if the pictures, previous text, and/or general meaning of the story makes sense with the substitution. In this second example for the same sentence, I like to see horses at the farm, if the student read, I like to see houses at the farm, the substitution is visually similar and there is an acceptable language structure. However, it's questionable if meaning cues were being used. Check the previous text to determine the use of meaning cues. If the prior text says, I like to see chickens at the farm, I like to see cows at the farm, I like to see pigs at the farm, then most likely meaning cues were not used in making the substitution of houses for horses, as the story up to the point of error is all about animals. There's no mention of houses. On the other hand, in this example, we can see here that the meaning cues strongly support the substitution of houses for horses because the prior text read, I went to see grandfather at the farm. He lives in a big house. There is a red barn behind the house. As the text mentioned grandfather's house, it is possible it influenced the error. The next cue we will look at is structural. Structure refers to the way language or other words in the English language or French language is constructed. Does the structure of the text make sense up to and including the substitution? When we analyze, we only take into account the text up to and including the error, nothing beyond the point of error. Structural cues answer the question, does it sound right? In the example, I like to see horses at the farm, if the reader read, I like to fly horses at the farm, the part of the sentence, I like to fly, is good language construction. Analysis for use of structure should only take into account the text up to and including the error. I like to fly does sound right, so structural cues were used. The substitution is not visually similar and it does not fit the meaning of all of the text, so meaning and visual cues were not used. Finally, let's look at visual information. Visual information is the way letters and words look. Readers use their knowledge of visual features of words and letters and connect these features to their knowledge of the way words and letters sound when spoken. If the letters in the attempt are visually similar to the letters in the words in the text, it is likely the reader has used visual information. It answers the question, does it look right? A visual example is, I like to see hares at the farm in place of, I like to see horses at the farm. We need to ask if the substitution looks like the word in the text. Some letters and words have very little differences and they have high visual similarity. The substitution hares for horses looks similar. It has many of the same letters, however it does not sound right. It is not an acceptable English sentence. It also does not make sense. Therefore, visual cues were used. When analyzing a running record, it is important not only to determine what cues were used when an error was made, but also what cues were probably used when a self-correction was made. Looking at the example, I want to see horses at the farm, we ask what cues contributed to the original error. The words are visually similar and the structure is intact. What probably caused the reader to self-correct this error? Without any other text or awareness of the meaning of the story, the use of meaning cues is difficult to determine. Most likely, attention was given to the ending consonant. The value of this activity is to look for patterns in the child's responses. You should not spend a great deal of time trying to figure out each miscue, searching for the right analysis. The idea is to reflect on the child's behavior, make your best hypothesis, and then look at data through the whole reading over time. What you are really looking for is an indication of the kinds of strategies the child is using. Once cues are analyzed, you might think about questions like these. Does the reader check information sources against one another? Does the reader use several sources of cues in an integrated way or rely on only one kind of information? Does the reader repeat what has been read as if to confirm his reading thus far? Does the reader reread to search for more information from the sentence or text? Does the reader make meaningful attempts before appealing to the teacher for help? Does the reader request help after making an attempt or several attempts? Does the reader notice when cues do not match? Does the reader stop at unknown words without actively searching? Does the reader read with phrasing and fluency? Does the reader make comments or responses that indicate comprehension of the story? These kinds of behaviors provide a description of the child's processing system. They reveal whether the child is using internal strategies which include self-monitoring, searching, self-correcting. Proficient readers stop and check their reading only if the three sources of information do not match. Sometimes students pause at errors. When this happens, the student knows something is wrong, but they do not know what to do about it. Sometimes students repeat phrases after an error. They know something's wrong and they're trying to gain additional information. Often the student will appeal for confirmation after making the error. Searching is also a strategy used by the student to search for and use information to solve a word. The student may use meaning, structural, or visual information, or a combination of the three sources of information. If this is the case, we would see the student looking at the pictures, trying to make the initial sound of the word to help them, covering parts of a word, chunking it, or reading on. Many readers cross-check. This means the student uses one or two sources of information to figure out the word and then cross-checks using the other, often the neglected source of information. An example would be the student reads ran instead of walked. It appears that the student has used meaning and structural cues because it sounds right and makes sense, but not visual cues. Ran does not visually match walked. Now that we know a little bit more about the different kinds of errors students can make, how do we score this? On the running record sheet, you will see 4 columns. The first one is where you indicate the errors, and the second one is where you indicate the self-corrections. Once you have indicated these, you're ready to analyze the errors. In the column for errors, write M, S, and V. We will look at which cues the child could have used. Circle the one that you feel was used. In the example, the child read one Saturday morning instead of on Saturday morning. One Saturday morning does make sense, so we circle the M. It also sounds right, so we circle the S. Visually, it is close. It has the same letters. The only thing is, the child did not consider the final E, and this changes on to one. Although both are acceptable, one could mean any Saturday morning, and on refers to this Saturday. The next sentence, I had my first ride on a train. The student read the train. Again, we indicate M, S, and V. The sentence makes sense, so we circle M. It sounds right, so we circle S. It is once again a visual error. If we look at the error, Dad got tickets for a man instead of Dad got tickets from a man, the sentence does make sense. However, based on everything we know up until now, there has been no mention of a man, so why would Dad buy tickets for a man? It does sound right, and visually it has the same letters. We circle the S because it sounds right, but not the M or the V. This could be a meaning error or a visual error. Do this for all of the errors. You may start to notice a pattern. If all of the errors are the same type, then that would tell you what help the student needs. For self-corrections, first you need to analyze the error. Once you've done that, you write M, S, and V in the self-correction column. Readers who self-correct are monitoring their reading and they realize something was not quite right. They use the extra information to correct the error. If we look at this sentence, it came slow into the station instead of it came slowly into the station, we see that it came slow makes sense, so in analyzing the error, we circle the M. It came slowly describes how the train came. It is an adverb of manner. It came slow is not the correct form of the adverb describing came. It should end in ly. We do not circle the S for sounds right. Slow and slowly are visually similar, so the visual cue was most likely used. We circle the V. Now we check what cues were used to self-correct the error. Most often, it is the neglected cue. In this case, the child realized the word was slowly and not slow. He realized it came slow is not correct in English, and he self-corrected to slowly. The S is circled in the self-correction column. Determining the self-correction rate is important. To do this, add the number of errors to the number of self-corrections and divide by the number of self-corrections. In this example, there were 6 errors and 2 self-corrections. Add them together for a total of 8 and then divide by 2, which is the number of self-corrections. The ratio is 1 to 4. This means for every 4 errors the student made, he or she corrected themselves once. A self-correction rate of 1 to 1, 1 to 2, or 1 to 3 means that a student is really monitoring their reading. They are aware when they make a mistake and that the meaning breaks down. High self-correction rates tell you that a student is not aware of their errors. This often indicates weaker comprehension. Other things to note when analyzing a running record are things like whether the reader understands the concepts of print. Does he or she recognize high-frequency words in the text? Is the child able to apply knowledge of letter-sound relationships to accurately decode words? Does the child read the text fluently with natural rhythm and phrasing reflecting understanding? Does he or she read it with irregular phrasing or word by word, suggesting limited or no understanding? And when questioning the student about the text, can he or she answer literal, inferential, and knowledge types of questions? By analyzing each error and self-correction, you can make a professional judgment about why the student read the text a certain way. You can see what strategies are being used successfully, which ones need to be introduced or reinforced, and what reading behaviors are interfering with the student's reading process. All this information will help identify students' strengths and learning needs. This information can be used to plan for improved student achievement in reading. There you have it, a quick course in analyzing running records. You may refer to the PM Benchmark Teacher's Resource Book for recommendations for future development. These are found on pages 32 to 39. For answers to any questions you may have about running records, please contact me by telephone at 514-422-3000, extension 32627, or by email at ascott@lbpearson.ca.